thank you for joining the opening MB100 Forum. I'm Lytton-Dickie, the founder of Meaningful Business. I'm looking forward to hosting you for our final event of 2020. So to kick off the event, I'll be joined by 4 of the judges for this year's MB100 to discuss what inspired them, the trends they saw in this year's nominations, and their hopes for what this group of leaders can achieve. I'm very pleased to welcome Antonia Wade, the Chief Marketing Officer of Capita, Kenneth Kwok, the CEO of Global Citizen Capital, Nikhil Seth, the UN Assistant Secretary General and Exec Director of UNITAR, and Sally Uren, the CEO of Forum for the Future. Welcome, guys. So we've got half an hour, so not long, so I'm going to dive straight in and ask each of you 2 questions, starting with you, Nikhil, if I may. And they are, firstly, what inspired you from this year's nominations and obviously the winners? And secondly, one trend that you drew out from the nomination you went through.
It was such a pleasure for me to have served as a judge, because each applicant was very inspiring, and reading all their accomplishments, it really was a source of great pleasure for me, who was very deeply involved in the development of the SDG. And it was heartening to see how sustainability champions are everywhere. Companies big and small and very diverse in terms of the kinds of services they provide. But what struck me most is the fact that the basic principles which are enshrined in the SDGs, one is to look at the integrated nature of things and how they are co-benefits of doing one thing on so many other things. Those are the factors which have been taken into account by so many people working in business. And I'm really happy that so many people, young people, entrepreneurs, diverse areas of activity have all contributed to this. One trend which struck me is captured in the word diversity. Diversity of gender, diversity of geographic regions and countries, diversity of the technical skills, diversity of the place they were in business. So if there's one trend which really impressed me, Tom, it was this, captured in this wonderful word called diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. And Sally, if I could come to you next.
Sure. So what inspired me? 2 things. I was really struck by the ambition for impact in the entries that I had the privilege to judge. There was some serious ambition there to change entire energy flows, to change entire textile systems. So huge ambition for impact. And then the second thing that I really liked was the creativity. One of the winners is somebody that's figured out how to take waste bread and make it into beer. So there was creativity littered throughout the presentations in a brilliant way. And I think the word that I would use for my trend is scaling. What I really was heartened by were the number of entries that are around scaling renewable energy, scaling alternative energy solutions, and then scaling the circular economy. So it really felt as though we have moved from these niche ideas to actually a position where they're all now beginning to scale. And that was really great to see.
Totally agree. Antonia.
I guess I looked at the corporate category, and one of the things that struck me is that the creativity, commercialism, and kind of innovation that typically you would have seen going into things like product development or growth of an organization is now being applied to solving some of the world's most critical challenges, acknowledging the impact that some of these organizations are having on the planet's resources, and therefore the very positive impact that they can have by changing their behaviors. So I was really heartened to see, that kind of level of focus, ambition, as Sally says, and innovation going into solving, as I said, some of the world's biggest challenges. For me, what I would say as a trend was around, I guess, again, speaks to what Sally was saying about kind of impact, was really starting to see this as a way of doing business. This isn't a bolt-on CSR activity that is, another team's problem or kind of an adjunct or a kind of greenwash of what you're doing. This is now becoming systemically how companies do business. And I thought that all of the award entries really, really brought that to life, whether they were doing something at a local level, regional level, or global level. That was very, very apparent to me and very inspiring.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kenneth, last but not least.
Yeah, you put me in a difficult spot to follow these three amazing leaders. First of all, I would like to remind everyone that the MB100 is not just the four of us judges. It's a lot of many other talented individuals who really put their time, their effort, and more importantly, their heart into judging. Frankly, as an impact investor, I don't like sometimes that we have to only pick 100. I learned something from each and every submission. But, you know, back to the whole 100 thing, representing wholesomeness and, you know, a perfect score for sustainability. My key takeaway from MB100 is as follows. Number one, every startup, whether it's for-profit, non-profit, or impact, definitely try to look after the local community. For me, I think that's very important because the whole concept of globalization, where you take global views 30,000 feet in the air and actually make it work to benefit your family, your community members, the marginalized communities within your ecosystem, that to me is the beginning of impact. And second, my favorite point about all this entire exercise is I felt like I went through an MBA just researching some of the stuff that, and I'm gonna admit it, there's vocabulary in there in these entries that I don't even know the words of. So it was a great learning exercise, and I truly believe that next time for MB100, it should be the other way. It should be the companies that are pitching to get in, actually educate us judges, you know, how to lead a more sustainable life. Because I think intergenerational and all that type of good stuff is what creates real and sustainable impact.
Well, hopefully we can do some of that starting with today, Kenneth, during the forum. Thanks, Pat. So Nikhil, if I could just turn to you. You were obviously instrumental in actually formulating SDGs and getting the member states to agree them in 2015 before they were officially launched at the start of 2016. What was your hope at that stage for how the private sector would engage with?
That is before 2015. And of course, I knew that unless business engaged equally robustly in their implementation, things are not going to change. Because business accounts for 70% of global output. They determine the quality of the growth. They determine things that we talk about very easily, of decent jobs, of gender equality, of the workplace itself. And till we got that right, post in 2015, that is in the implementation stage, we'd never get to anywhere close to what had been set out in the 2030 agenda. I'm very happy, and today's event is just an indication of how this has spread like wildfire. It has caught the young people's imagination, and how people and businesses all over, big and small, are equally engaged in its implementation. Of course, what worries me is that when we say business sector, that captures a lot. And I feel that for the small, the self-employed, the businesses, we need to do much more to reach out to them to be able to imbue the sense of what the SDGs mean and how can they contribute to that. Thank you, Tom.
And obviously we're now, you know, we're 1 year into this decade of action, Nikhil. So what more does need to be done, and what's your kind of advice to the private sector on how they can do more?
I think private sector, you need to work a lot internally in your own hierarchies, in your own systems, because there are throwaway sustainability officers, but it's not been as mainstreamed in businesses as it should be, number one. How do you make this the goal of everyone from top to bottom in a business hierarchy? Second, build even stronger partnerships with academia and civil society. Often these have been forces that have been not working together as closely as they should. And thirdly, I think, what I mentioned earlier, we need to have a greater engagement. Each big company should adopt 2,000 self-employed small entrepreneurs and help them also navigate through sustainability. I think we do these three things, we'd be able to make a much bigger impact.
And Antonia, I think that leads quite nicely to a question for you, which obviously is having judged lots of the corporate leaders this year, and obviously as Chief Marketing Officer of a huge business yourself, what is kind of your call to action to other leaders within those types of business?
Look, I think the points that we just heard are really important ones. And I think, having always worked in large corporate matrixed organizations, it can be really hard to turn a whole corporate towards any sort of meaningful business agenda. When I looked across the entries, what struck me was that in the largest corporates, it is very much still the preserve of a smaller number of people. So that really resonated with me, versus in the more medium-sized companies where it really felt like it was everybody's job. And I think that is a big call to action and something that we in corporates can learn, which is how do you really mainstream it and make it part of everybody's objectives or everybody's way of working. And I think as a result of that kind of divide that you see in the largest corporates, the opportunity to really innovate and do dramatically different things is reduced, because you're not really galvanizing that kind of collective power of the whole organization to come up with new ideas and really drive them through. I really love the idea of, adopt 2,000 SMEs or, whatever it is. I think that there should be bolder calls to actions, and almost the larger you are as a corporate, the bolder you ought to be in your ambition. And I think that there is still, you can do big things in big corporates because of your scale, but actually the delta for change is smaller than it is in some of the smaller organizations. And I think that we in large corporates need to embrace a much bigger delta for change, and not just do kind of what looks like big change, but actually is only quite incremental in terms of behaviors and the impacts that we're having.
Yeah. And Sally, obviously at the Forum for the Future, lots of your work is about multi-stakeholder collaborations and partnerships. I think part of what we want to do with the MB100 is enable corporates and SMEs to work better together. What's your advice on how some of those type of partnerships can be formed and then made successful?
Well, I think number one, be clear about the problem you're trying to solve. So where actually collaborations can fall at the first hurdle is that everybody thinks that they're having a conversation about something quite different. So what is the purpose of the collaboration? What is the problem you're trying to solve? There needs to be a shared challenge. Then create a vision of what does solving that look like. So what does that positive ambition really look like? And third, ensure that everyone has something distinct to contribute. So collaborations really come to life when you bring different parts of a given system together and they all add something. So you start to get a lot of additionality into the mix. Number four, it is a game of give and take. There is a massive difference between a collaboration and a coalition. Coalition tends to be voices that are relatively harmonious. They're coming together to share an opinion on a particular challenge, but that's where it stops. So the big difference between collaboration for action and a coalition is that everybody is willing to put something in and to take something out. And that then brings me to the last point, which is the really successful collaborations, and this is a bit dull, but they have really good governance. So it's really clear who has decision-making rights, who needs to take the decision, who you need to take advice from. And I think if you can get that set of ingredients right, so clear vision, clear sense of positive outcomes, everyone's clear about what they're contributing and they're in it to both give and to take, clear governance, and clarity of why we're having this conversation, what is the action we need to deliver. Plus, final ingredient, a dollop of persistence. I've run so many of these collaborations and they take often 2-3 years to even get up and running. So just be realistic and tenacious all at once.
Have you got an example of one that you think has worked or is working really well?
Yeah, I think our collaboration in the cotton industry is beginning to work. It's 4 years in, but we have been working with a whole range of different actors in the cotton industry, from the farmers through to the intermediaries, through to the sustainable cotton standards, through to the brands and the retailers, to really try and mainstream sustainability in cotton, because conventional cotton production has a whole heap of negative environmental and social and economic impacts. And just a few weeks ago, we published a report that talked about how all of the cotton standards are now going to harmonise what they're asking for the smallholder farmers to do, which sounds on the face of it a little bit dull. But if you're a smallholder cotton farmer and you want to switch from conventional to more sustainable cotton, actually the multiplicity of standards and requirements is just bewildering. And so this harmonization of what it needs to take to convert from conventional to sustainable will make it easier, and hopefully will catalyze the transition from conventional to sustainable. So yeah, it's beginning to create change, but it's been a long, hard slog.
Yeah. And I think that's probably relevant to lots of actually the entrepreneurs on this year's list who are working within agri-tech or agriculture around the world. And Kenneth, if I just turn to you as the impact investor among us. 70% of this year's MB100 are entrepreneurs, and some of them are pretty early stage. So what is your advice to those leaders on how they can think big and scale their companies and initiatives?
Well, in the spirit of being practical, I would just like to offer two very simple mindsets, for example. Number one, you're never early to actually do both for-profit, non-profit, and impact work. And why do I say that? If you look at my Zoom background, you see a lot of trees, right? Global citizen capital is about, as a Chinese saying goes, the earlier you plant the trees, the faster they grow, hopefully, and to create more shade for a larger community, right? Don't think of your product as only being able to check one box, right? When we actually mentor a lot of startup founders, especially in early stage, we help build into their blueprint DNA a part where they actually not just do social good, but make that social good scalable in humongous nonprofit enterprises. I'll just give you an example. One of the companies we have invested in is now a service provider to UNICEF before Series A. Right? That doesn't usually happen, but it's because the founder had the vision saying, hey, I may be very small, I'm not making money, but what I can do really can scale global NGOs. And a connection was made through WEF, and voila, 6 months later it happened. So never think of yourself, again, planting one tree. Plant 6, plant 12, okay? And my second point is, again, I'm so honored today because I look up to, Sally, Antonia, and Nikhil, and I learn from them on almost an everyday basis in how they preach about the importance of combining creativity, right, a visionary, as well as what I like to call a more tangible way of looking at the SDGs. I'm glad we are past the point that we just don't talk about SDG 3 or SDG 6 anymore in such broad strokes. People are now finally narrowing in to the targets and even more details after that. So yes, I strongly encourage you, no matter what stage you are at your startup, don't just level at the SDG level, go deeper. And guess what? If you have any issues, you have a humongous support system within the MB network. Just imagine how cool it would be if your startup has, Antonia, Sally, Nikhil, and maybe me as your advisors. Again, I'm not volunteering anyone's time here, but that's the whole point of the MB community. We all help each other, so do reach out.
Exactly. Thank you, Ken. I couldn't have said that any better. And on that point, Nikhil, what's your advice for how some of the MB100 and obviously the wider community can engage with the UN and actually get the support of the various bodies that make up part of it?
Tom, that's a difficult question because a structured sort of engagement with the UN is through something we call the UN Global Compact, which is headquartered in New York. And that's the portal for engagement with the UN. Now, though they're essentially very large companies, well-heeled, well-funded, are the companies which become party to and participate with the UN Global Compact. But the UN itself is a very diversified structure, and just as my organization is engaged in learning and knowledge and capacity building, there are so many other specialized agencies. You have something on intellectual property in Geneva, you have something on health in Geneva, and so on. So I think depending on the space different entrepreneurs are occupying and the kind of things they want to engage in, they need to find a more diversified engagement with the UN. There's no one magic formula which I can give which will work for everyone. I think headquarter, especially New York-based organizations, are very heavy for smaller businesses to engage with. But I think more nimble organizations like mine, it's easy to engage with us and we work on almost everything from peace to planet to prosperity and people. So it's easier to engage with organizations like us, with other organizations like health and UNESCO and so on. So I would say that each individual company, each individual MB member has to see what is the scope of their activities and what is the primary area of focus for their activities, and then find a more decentralized way of engaging, find the right people in the UN who will help them along. But I agree with Kenneth on the network engagement. In the learning space, I've discovered that peer-to-peer learning is the most important thing. And if you look back at our lives, you learn much more from each other than you learn from instructors and teachers. So that peer-to-peer learning, which a network like yours allows people to do, is the most valuable learning space I think we can have. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Nikhil. And I guess it's a similar type of question, Sally, but again, your work is focused on system change, as you said, and maybe there's a thought that that's reserved for the larger companies to drive that change. How can entrepreneurs be part of those conversations and engage, effectively?
Sure. Entrepreneurs are critical to driving systemic change for two reasons. Entrepreneurs innovate the what, so they'll think about a new product, a new service, but that in of itself isn't enough. We all know that innovations can often fail and often fail quite quickly. But what entrepreneurs also do is innovate on the how. So what is the business model that will allow this innovation to scale? What is the way of advertising a particular product that will bring it to market? And how can I think differently about this problem? How can I look at the problem from a different directions? Because systems change when you have big pressure coming to bear on our everyday lives, plus innovations that are bubbling up from the niche, they hit the mainstream. And this is where entrepreneurs are thirdly really important. They're willing to do things differently. And so entrepreneurs really are innovating not just the what, but the how. They're also pretty pioneering, and they are really the ingredients for driving systemic change.
And I think part of that, Kenneth, is how they can work collaboratively with entrepreneurs in other parts of the world. And I know we discussed this on a number of occasions, but how can we drive better collaboration between entrepreneurs in Asia, for example, and maybe their counterparts in the West and other regions?
Again, to be practical, let's remember the basic concept of comparative advantages. What we have done for a few startups which are based in Europe and United States, and even one in Brazil, is to analyze, hey, what do we have in Asia that's economically more feasible? Research labs, raw materials, labor costs, right? A lot of people may not understand that Asia is a very big region. We have developed countries, we have developing countries, we have least developed countries. We all have to work together. So every time you think of a problem that requires a globally scaled solution, now that you have people in MB100 which are based in Asia, such as myself, right? Ask, right? Do you need certain quotations? Do you need certain channel discovery sessions? Do you need certain introductions? Because frankly speaking, the most successful startups, because most are, have limited budget, the more they can make $1 look like $10, they are already on a winning path. That's point one. And point two, and I think this is actually a very interesting webinar because we've never mentioned the C word yet so far. So I hate to break it, because of COVID-19, technology will always be at the forefront of, at least in the near future, of how businesses digitally transform. Asia has definitely some of the most widest pools of IT specialists due to our populations in India and China. If you need manpower assistance, right, again, please do reach out to us. Maybe we can get you a team of engineers who are able to deliver solutions faster and cheaper. Again, I'm not saying, commenting on the quality and stuff, but do think of us as a potential option for sourcing your needs. And hopefully we all work together somehow in the end, because guess what? We all live under one atmosphere.
Thanks, Ken. I think part of what we want to do with Meaningful Business more generally, and we'll be launching early next year, is actually enable that interaction and through a membership model, so people can get in touch with each other and reach out for help and stuff. So that is coming soon. Antonia, and again, we discussed this on the briefing call and we've talked about it before, but how can we make sure that corporates are really moving beyond greenwashing or SDG washing, or whatever you want to call it, to be delivering real, genuine impact over the next few years?
Thanks, Tom, and I will absolutely answer that. But one thing I was just reflecting on as I heard my fellow judges talk, I think that inevitably, one of the benefits of being an entrepreneur is you can act fast, right? And you can move quickly. And it's hard to engage a corporate to move quickly for all sorts of reasons. And there's that old adage of, an entrepreneur only needs one yes, whereas a corporate entrepreneur only needs one no, right? So it can be hard to get things moving and done in a corporate environment. And also, I think sometimes corporates sort of feel the scale of the problem to be so daunting that it's almost encourages a level of inertia. So I think, certainly when you're doing a kind of partnership, thinking about the language that will motivate a corporate to act quickly. So think about phraseology around pilots, MVPs. So it feels like you can move fast in a protected environment or an incubated environment within a corporate in order to test and learn and then push a corporate organization or a mindset forward or in a different direction. And as I often say to my team, the second best time to start is today. So you can look back and wish you started 6 months ago, but we're better off not worrying about that and just start today and start with something. So you're really thinking about that as you're trying to make it feel safe for a corporate to act when potentially, particularly with the current environment, it sort of feels more, it can feel more enticing to not act. To go back to your question about greenwashing. I mean, I think my point there is that your purpose is fixed, right? And your purpose as an organization is static, and it is what drives you, and it's your cultures and it's your values. What flexes depending on market demands is your propositions and what you offer into the market. I think what the challenge comes is when one is mistaken for the other, and when you try and create a proposition out of what you're doing in this area, or if you're trying to pretend to use your purpose in order to sell product, right? So for me, it's about really thinking about how do you stay true to your purpose, which is fixed in your North Star, and how do you protect your propositions as being something that flexes according to market demand, and make sure that every point within a corporate, you're being very, very clear and distinctive about which one you are, these types of activities are helping to further. Otherwise, I think that particularly, actually, I think that there will be a backlash across a load of brands actually as a result of the way that they've treated customers in COVID. And I think that it will become tempting for people to try and use this type of agenda to almost kind of counter potentially negative perceptions to the brands and products and the way that customers have been treated as they've needed brands differently in COVID.
Yeah, no, as you say, we've seen that backlash a lot this year. So I think, brands have to act authentically. And so with 2 minutes to go, I'm just going to ask you all one question to end. And that is, if we look ahead to 2021 and next year's MB100, what would you hope to see from next year's nominations?
Why don't I go first, because I finished speaking last. So I would like to see some of these big mega corporates like mine and others doing one hugely innovative and different thing that you would never, ever have expected them to do.
Brilliant. Kenneth, you want to go next?
I would say think impact of your, I would say think of the impact of what you're doing And it's not got to be impact in terms of, say, eradicating world poverty or something dramatic like that. But if you look at the targets that are there in the 2030 agenda, each one of them can inspire your definition of the kind of impact in your personal lives and also in the kind of business you're in. So you can redefine impacts more suitable to the ground.
Thanks, Nikhil. Kenneth?
Sure. Plant more trees, environmentally and also spiritually. And most importantly, be inclusive. As an investor, we really do try to ensure that, that even startups, you go through your value chains and supply chains and see where you are actually creating value and making things available, accessible, and affordable to all.
Perfect. And Sally, to finish off the session.
Thank you. God, I'm struggling with that one, but I've got there. I would love each entry, each applicant to ask themselves 2 questions. Is what I'm entering into this competition, or is the way I'm thinking about the world, am I designing incremental change or am I designing transformational change? And if you can't quite get an answer to that question, then ask yourself the next question, which is what I'm doing, my product innovation, my service innovation, is it locking in an existing unsustainable system? Am I just perpetuating an economic system that we know isn't working, a food system that we know isn't working? Or is my brilliant idea allowing the emergence of a new system? So obviously you want an answer of yes to both, yes and no. So yes, I'm designing for transformational change, and no, I'm not locking, I'm actually allowing the emergence of a new system. So really designing transformational change, not locking in an existing unsustainable system. If every entry designed for transformational change and allow the emergence of a new system, job will be done in 2 or 3 years.
There you go. Perfect way to end, and that is the gauntlet set for everyone watching. So thank you guys. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for all your support throughout this year's process.